I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope. Thank you for joining us for today's episode. We're going to start off by discussing ISIS repatriation to countries, of course, of fighters and their families' citizenship and nationalities. That has been an issue which has been long-standing for now, the whole issue of ISIS brides, as it had come up specifically, of course, in the UK, but of course around the world as well. At issue is, how does one deal with ISIS fighters themselves? And secondly, how does then one deal with their family members, many of whom are probably detained and or stuck in camps, be it in Syria or Iraq. What of those countries of whom these fighters and their family members are citizens? What kind of responsibility do they hold at this point in time regarding that? Now, the Defense Secretary of the United Kingdom, Ben Wallace, has said that ministers will be guilty of rendition if the government brought British ISIS fighters and their families back from Syria against their will. Is he correct? There are obviously disagreements on that issue as well. Certainly quite a wide-ranging issue. So let me introduce our guests who are joining us to discuss this further. We're joined now by Simon Hale-Ross, who is a senior lecturer in law and policing in the Department of Law and Criminology at Edge Hill University. He's joining us now from Manchester. Also joining us is Lyal Hamourtziadou, who is a lecturer at Birmingham City University and principal researcher of Iraq body count. She's joining us now from Stoke-on-Trent at Staffordshire in the UK. Lyal and Simon, thank you both for your time this morning. Lyal, I'll start with you. What do you make of this issue of ISIS fighters and their families? How should a country like the UK be dealing with its own citizens in this regard?
Thank you for the question. First of all, just the term rendition is inappropriately used here. This is not a country that treats people inhumanely, that even has the death penalty. So as British citizens, I believe these people would be safe back in the UK to be perhaps tried if there is evidence of any crime they've committed.
And Simon, do you agree with that? Or do you think it is, as Ben Wallace has said, that, listen, these people may very well say, listen, we were brought back to the UK against our will, and so you've defied our human rights?
Yeah, I would totally agree with Lyal there, to be honest. The term rendition has been totally misused by Mr. Wallace. He seems to have confused both terms of extradition and rendition. There are four types of rendition. Rendition to justice, where it's the legitimate legal transport of one person from one state to another to face criminal charges and to face a criminal trial. There's military rendition, there's rendition to detention, and then there's extraordinary rendition, which I think the minister seems to be confusing the terms with. But Lily's quite right. We have human rights structures here, the United Nations, European Convention on Human Rights, and for the moment at least, the EU CFR. So we have plenty of human rights structures here. So yes, I'm afraid Ben is completely wrong and has taken the term out of context.
All right, so then Lyal, are we saying then that the UK should take ISIS fighters and their family members? What and how easy would accountability look like then?
Well, first of all, they're not simply ISIS-connected people. They're British citizens. So yes, of course, the UK should bring them back. Accountability, that depends on our justice system. There are plenty of people that even the UK has sent to the Middle East that have committed crimes, possibly, that have not been held accountable. So really, it's up to the British state to hold people accountable, whether they be ISIS-friendly or army-friendly or private company-friendly. We have a justice system for that reason.
But then I wonder, Lyal, as Ben Wallace said, he said that, listen, if some of these ISIS fighters, alleged ISIS fighters too, I should say, because obviously proven innocent until proven guilty, pardon me, I imagine that, a lot of people would be uncomfortable living beside somebody who has been proven innocent if they've already been stained with this ISIS accusation, wouldn't they? Because that's what Ben Wallace also mentioned later on in his statements. Would society really even accept these people back in, do you think?
Society mostly follows what the state defines as a threat. So we have been told time and again that these people would be dangerous, they would be a number one threat. I don't necessarily believe that is the case. Would I feel comfortable living next to a family that's been brought back from Syria? Yes, I would. No more or less than a military family.
That's interesting, Simon, because, I imagine, not to put Lydia on the spot, but I imagine that there would be others in the UK who would be uncomfortable with that, especially, if I'm looking at just the families, and if we're not even talking about ISIS fighters themselves, the kinds of experiences they've had and possible brainwashing that they may have gone under, how does one then bring them back into society?
Well, we have a multi-agency approach here in the United Kingdom through the prevent strategy, through the contest strategy, to assist people returning from such areas. In terms of bringing them back and charging them, listen, these ISIS fighters, they've not been over there for a holiday. They have committed serious atrocities, genocide against the Yazidi people, the rape of women and children. These are not nice people that are currently in these camps. They have committed offences. We have the Terrorism Act 2000 in the United Kingdom, which has an extra-jurisdictional effect, which means if you commit a terrorism act on, forgive me for using the F word here, foreign soil, then you are liable under the Terrorism Act if you fall into the category. There are also the Terrorism Act 2006.
But then at issue, Simon, I apologize for interrupting your train of thought there, but at issue would be, how does one prove any allegation of atrocities?
This is the biggest concern facing our government, I think, and facing legal experts. The level of evidence required needs to fit within our criminal law system, which means the state needs to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that these people have committed such atrocities. And at the moment, they are suggesting that they've not done anything. They've been at home looking after the children, or they've just been policing the local community. They've not done anything wrong. So how do you find the evidence to suggest, concrete evidence enough to prove beyond a reasonable doubt to a jury of 12 that these people have committed such offences? And that's the difficulty, and that's why the UK states are absolutely petrified by this, because if we do rendition them back legally under the rendition process to justice, and they are found innocent in a court of law, then they will be released back into society, and then you have the attributed costs of, do we keep an eye on them? Do we put them under a TPIM order? And this is the problem.
So then, Lily, that's the real issue then, isn't it? If some say, listen, we don't want these people back because they may very well pose a danger to the rest of us in the UK, that's actually a fair argument to make in the sense that I would imagine that it would be really hard to actually find the kinds of evidence required to prove beyond a reasonable doubt their guilt.
Yes, that is correct. But if we're basing the danger on some alleged crimes they may or may have not committed abroad, then exactly what is the level of that danger? Because we don't know what they have committed abroad. And I'm sorry to be making the comparison with the military all the time, but we have soldiers here who have gone abroad and saw terrible things, maybe killed people, maybe more than that, but we are quite happy for them to come back here with all, that involves. So I am not sure what the danger is exactly.
I imagine, the answer would be the danger is that these people may very well carry out, quote unquote, terrorist attacks within the UK's borders then.
I suppose, did they carry out terrorist attacks before somewhere else? If we don't know, how can we judge the level of the danger? We don't know.
Indeed. So Simon, again, that then complicates the situation even further, doesn't it, Simon? Because if we can't prove beyond a reasonable doubt the guilt of anybody who is truly guilty, how does then one keep national security, preserve national security, and yet also not completely give up the responsibilities that come with a government taking care of its own nationals?
Listen, the test of any state is to protect the right of its citizens to live in peace and harmony in a democracy. That's the test of our state, at least. I'm sorry to disagree a little bit here with Lily, but to compare ISIS fighters to our own military is disingenuous. Our own military are not going to come back here and blow up the MEN or attempt to drive over people on the streets of London. There is a huge difference between those that have been radicalized to believe in a dangerous cult-like ideology, which brings into disrepute religion, political belief, and other ideological beliefs. They've caused so much damage to our society in general. And the military, I'm afraid, they wouldn't fit within that same category.
But I imagine, Simon, I'm sorry for interrupting you again, but I imagine what Lily meant was she's talking about those military servicemen in many parts of the Western world who have actually committed atrocities, in places like Iraq or other places where the UK has been involved, as some of those even that we may not know about, because again, it was overseas, and there is that code of secrecy and brotherhood, whatever we may call it, between many military servicemen, especially in those countries. So that's a concern, isn't it? That somebody may be very well getting away with the sorts of crimes that have been committed abroad, again, within the guise of the military. Not to say that the military itself encourages that, but that is still a concern too, isn't it?
It is a concern, but I'm not sure how great of a concern it is. We do obviously have some rogue military personnel who do decide to commit atrocities whilst they're abroad, and I would hope that once evidence is found against that person, that they're brought to justice, and they often are in the United Kingdom. But generally speaking, the UK government and the UK people are quite proud of our military. So we do need to be careful with how we're wording this. There is an issue of when these ISIS fighters, there's 2,000 roughly that are currently in the Kurdish prisons spread across 7. 12,000 in total, of course, but 2,000 UK nationals. Yeah. If we were to allow all of them back in at once, that may well cause a problem. There needs to be a process here, due process, where they are brought in sporadically with evidence and hopefully charged for committing terrorism offences.
Let's add another voice to this conversation. We're joined now by Lyal, who is a human rights expert. He's visiting professor at the Raoul Wallenberg Institute of Human Rights and Humanitarian Law, joining us now from Rome. Lyal, as always, we appreciate you taking your time out to join us and to give us your insight. What are your thoughts, Lyal, about the human rights of even ISIS fighters and their family members? Of course, we're talking about the context of the UK, but we can talk about any respective country, of course, of whom the nationals, these ISIS members and their family members may be.
Yes, absolutely. It's a good question, and it's that human rights are most important to be protected and promoted where their people are most unpopular, because that's where we need to have human rights guarded most carefully. And the reason is simple, and that is that when we're talking about ISIS fighters or any other terrorist who incurs the wrath of the people and majority opinion, or likewise for extreme political dissidents in some cases, etc. You need to have those basic protections, and that's what human rights is all about. So that human rights guarantee the basic rights of the individual against the power of the state and even non-state actors. So when we're talking about ISIS fighters, of course, people are understandably and correctly angered about them, but it's in those times when politicians and people may not want to respect their rights, and that there's a risk that those rights would be trampled over roughshod. And in this case of ISIS foreign fighters, yeah. I think it's correct to say that the government has come up with a lot of excuses to evade its responsibility and to prosecute on according to the grounds of nationality when we're talking about British nationals. Mm.
Okay, so Lily, one of the issues that has also been brought up in concern in regarding this entire issue of repatriation of ISIS fighters to their home countries, be it the UK or otherwise, is that if they remain for much longer within those camps or within those detention centers where they are again surrounded essentially by the same kinds of people with the same kinds of ideology, that actually this will give resurgence to Daesh 2.0 or ISIS 2.0. Is that a legitimate concern?
That is indeed a legitimate concern. We saw that happen in Iraq, in Iraqi prisons, which is one of the birthplaces of the Islamic State, in fact, were the Iraqi prisons. I would like to clarify something here. I'm not comparing ISIS to the British military or indeed any military. I work for Iraq Body Count, and I know very well the crimes that ISIS are committing in Iraq. I know that this year alone, they've killed over 1,000 people, 1,000 civilians. So I know what they do. What I'm concerned with is prejudice, being prejudiced against these British people who went, we don't quite know about. That is exactly the point. We don't know. So it is important that these people get a fair hearing and possibly a fair trial if it goes that far. This is my concern. I don't like the prejudice that we seem to be having towards families who decided to live elsewhere, maybe in a different way of life, which is their right. I don't know that any of them has committed the crime, but you are correct that the longer they remain in those camps, the more they are at risk for their lives and for being perhaps brainwashed and radicalized.
And then Simon, that then goes to a difficulty, right? If these people do come back to the UK or to their respective home countries, how does a government then deal with their children, with their family members, with their wives or whomever who have lived for so long in such conditions and around such people? You require programs to be in place. I mean, there needs to be an organized fashion to do this, right? So that, again, we don't see a resurgence of the kind of ideology that ISIS follows.
Absolutely, and again, agreeing with Lily there, she's absolutely correct. The state, the actual overcrowding in the prisons within, especially the Kurdish northwestern controlled areas, it's a propellant, isn't it? It's a propellant for further radicalization. It basically says, die trying or live in these conditions. So they do need to come back at some point, and we do need to deal with this. The issue, of course, is resources. At the moment, as you know, worldwide, everyone seems to have not much money and not many resources to deal with these particular issues. So at the moment, it's much easier for the United Kingdom to say, do you know what? You've made your bed, go and lie in it. Stay there until we can decide what to do with you. And it needs to be dealt with. They need to come back here. If they are convicted here, we then have another issue, is that radicalization in United Kingdom prisons is rife. So ISIS groups within UK and England and Wales, England Welsh prisons is growing, as is the ideology. So it's trying to get rid of this ideology, and it's proving very difficult.
All right, so then Lyal, how does one deal with it? Because this is a challenge upon a challenge, isn't it? Where it's easy to point the fingers at a government like the UK and say, listen, take these people back. But then at the same time, if it is, as Simon there says, that even within prisons currently, there's an issue of radicalization, this will add ever more pressure on that system, won't it?
Simon is correct that there is a risk of further radicalization in prison and the other concerns he raised. But none of those reasons justify, infringing the right of every person to a fair trial. It's something that Lily mentioned, and I'm glad she underscored that. So, these other issues, they have to be dealt with. They're not necessarily, I wouldn't want to underestimate them. But it means, some prison reform and some de-radicalization programs and comprehensive reintegration into communities, rehabilitation where that's possible, to the extent possible. That's what, human rights is all about. And so if the government just wants to say, well, we're going to leave people, our nationals, dying in these terrible camps, regardless of whether they may be guilty or not.
Lyal, I just wanted to ask you, I'm going to take a bit of extra time program, just under a minute if you can, Lyal, as a final thought. What of the human rights of people living in the UK right now and their genuine concerns about any ISIS fighters or alleged ISIS fighters coming into the country? Obviously national security and being able to live in peace in your own home and knowing that you'll be safe on the streets, that's also a human right. So how does one balance this almost catch-22 situation?
It's not really a catch-22 situation. You're correct to say that everybody has the right to life. Everybody has the right to live in peace and security. But that is a separate problem of counterterrorism, and that doesn't mean that we just level broad allegations and lift the right to the presumption of innocence without a fair trial. So I would just close with that comment: is that there's a big difference between an alleged criminal and a convicted criminal.
All right, and that's a good point to end on. But of course, I'll appreciate all guests who have joined us today for this discussion. Simon, Lily, and Lyal, we appreciate your insight and, of course, putting into context all the many facets and issues surrounding this. Viewers, the issue of ISIS repatriation has been a long-standing one ever since, of course, that issue, as I said in my introduction, of ISIS brides came up. Shamima Begum specifically, we remember, and her plea to come back to the UK, even though she doesn't really regret necessarily going to Syria/Iraq to be part of ISIS, although at some level she may. How does one hold such people to account for their ideology, for traveling to Syria or otherwise to Iraq even, to be part of ISIS or to at least help ISIS in some way? And what of those fighters who've actually fought? How does one prove that they were fighters? How does one find the evidence? What will the trial look like? How would you de-radicalize their family members, their children who have only really known life in camps, squalid camps, with other, again, ISIS family members who probably only have the same kind of ideology around them as well? How does the world really deal with this in a fashion where, again, you're not ignoring the rights of your own nationals abroad and you're also taking care of national security at home? Complicated issues, certainly, and certainly revisiting many countries' foreign policies in these regards would certainly play a huge regard also. I'll be back, though, with my next segment after this break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here on Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. We're going to discuss now the issue of Moria camp on Lesbos Island in Greece, and the issue of how that camp is just overflowing with migrants, and the issues that has raised not only for the Greek government, but basically for Europe as a whole, about how it deals with the many migrants that have arrived on its shores. And of course, Greece, as we know, is one of those countries that receives a lot of these migrants, especially those leaving the shores of Turkey. Now, Moria camp, just to put it into context for you, according to the UNHCR, is built for 3,000. That's its capacity. But it actually holds, at this point in time, around 14,400 migrants. Just recently, we had an Afghan woman die in a fire that tore through one of the shipping containers that was used as an improvised living quarters, and then that led to protests, which were quite violent as well at times. And of course, that's all understandable, not justified though, but understandable frustration on the part of many of these asylum seekers who are stuck there on that island, considering how tough now the EU is making it for them to be able to go further into the EU, and the fact that many other EU countries seemingly do not want to share the load of these migrants as well. So there's a lot of connected issues here to discuss. We're now joined by Marianna Karakoulaki, who is a journalist and doctoral researcher at the University of Birmingham. She's joining us now from Birmingham itself. Marianna, thanks for your time this morning. What do you make of this issue on Lesbos and in the Moria camp? Greece is now threatening that it'll deport 10,000 migrants, I believe. How does a country like Greece deal with this humanely?
Greece cannot deal with it humanely on its own. It's Europe's responsibility to take care of the issue, because the issue was created because of Europe's migration policies. So Moria camp and the other camps on the islands, because it's not only Moria, it's all 5 camps that are known as hotspots that are in this situation. Moria just happens to have more refugees than the others. The situation was created because of the EU-Turkey agreement, and this is Europe's responsibility.
So are you seeing any sign on the part of Europe, Diana, to move towards some semblance of a more reasonable policy? Because I imagine the likes of Italy, Hungary, and others would completely refuse to take in anybody.
Hungary will certainly refuse to take anyone because of its authoritarian regime. I would call it government. Italy. Its political situation at the moment is quite confusing, so we're not sure what will happen. But people in Greece and those in Italy, because it's not only Greece that is in this situation, Italy is in this situation as well. they should be equally distributed throughout Europe, or at least be led to reunited with their families, because a lot of them have their family reunification cases pending.
Yeah, so then what do you think at this point in time then a reasonable policy would look like? Because, there is being spoken of course, as you know, distribution of these migrants across Europe to all the member states that make up the European Union. But it seems that it's only the likes of Germany and a few others, I believe, who have actually taken in their fair share. That creates an obstacle which is very hard to circumvent, isn't it?
Certainly. The first step that needs to be done before starting to think about redistributing people is to stop following the EU-Turkey agreement, because this is not a legal binding agreement. It is just a statement. People, first of all, need to be need to be moved to the Greek mainland. That's the first step, because the islands are not humane, and they don't have the capacity to keep all these people in, and they don't have the facilities. So first of all, people need to be taken to the Greek mainland. And after that, we need to rethink the Dublin regulation, because people stay in Greece because of the Dublin regulation, which means that every person that arrives in the first country of arrival, they should stay there and they should have their asylum considered there. So it's a much more complicated issue rather than just saying people need to be redistributed or taken to other countries. The EU regulations need to be rethought and changed completely.
I imagine also politics and sense of populations would make a huge difference too, wouldn't it, Marianna? Because I imagine that many Greeks would say, listen, we're still very much an economy that is recovering from years of austerity, etc. How on earth are we going to be able to handle these people?
Certainly sentiments have changed, but the feelings are still mixed. The Greek people, despite their economic difficulties, they still show solidarity. Yet we do have a rise of right-wing sentiment, especially on the island, but this is not the primary example. The primary example is that people show solidarity. And the refugee crisis is not something that influenced the elections, for example, or voting during the elections. It didn't play such a huge role, and this is shown by several reports that were published before and after the Greek elections. So the feelings are mixed, but this is something that it was always the case in Greece specifically. In other countries, it may be a bit different.
Right. So, okay. So let's talk for a moment then about that EU-Turkey deal, because I know that an EU official is actually a German official, I believe, is visiting Turkey and will be visiting Greece as well, I believe, to talk about, in fact, that deal itself and how it seems to be falling apart it seems in some regards, because Turkey is complaining, listen, it simply isn't getting enough aid to be able to handle all the refugees that it is currently hosting. What do you think should be happening in that regard? Is it just about throwing money at Turkey and saying, listen, it's your problem?
I think this is what is happening. For me, the EU-Turkey statement is an absolute human rights violation, because it's not a legal binding agreement, but apparently Greece, the EU, and not Turkey at the moment, they are following it as if it's a legal binding agreement, but it has created a border within Greece, because due to this statement, people who are on the island cannot move to the mainland. And this is the main reason why the Greek islands are in this situation at the moment. And it might have worked number-wise, especially in the beginning, but as we have seen after this summer, it's no longer working because Turkey is not following it. Turkey is not restricting people crossing.
All right, so then how much of all of this do you think then would be different if we didn't have all those right-leaning governments? If I may, I'm going to go back to the example of Hungary, of course, but I imagine there are, of course, a lot of examples across Europe, and we may even possibly look at the UK as well and its policies towards migrants also, in some regards as a right-wing or conservative. How does that all affect all of this? Because I imagine that just puts such a brick wall up that it's really hard to get past that, isn't it? Where you have politicians just saying no.
I'm not sure if it's a matter of left or right, because in Greece we did have left-leaning government, but we still had the restriction of movement. So it's a much higher issue, and then something that it's much more complicated than the divide between the left and the right. Well, if the EU in general was led by a left-leaning government, I believe that people would have been able to move freely in Europe, and Europe would have been more acceptable. Something similar to what had happened in the summer of 2015, for example, when the Balkan route was opened, where people arrived in Greece and they just moved freely throughout Europe, and they met with their families or they started new lives.
Okay, Marianna, we'll leave there at that as our final word, but sincerely appreciate your time this morning. That was Marianna Karakoulaki speaking to us from Birmingham in the UK, sharing her thoughts, of course, on this important topic because, of course, this is one about human rights. You know, we always forget that these are human beings, of course, in these camps, in places like Moria, on Lesbos Island, in Greece, and they're living in squalid conditions. As I said, a camp built for 3,000, hosting 14,400. That is no joke. There are fights over simple things like bread and water and, the use of restrooms, etc. All of that. And then, of course, you have issues of sexual abuse, etc. And all of that then compounded by the fact that these people are hopeless. They have not been given any hope of being given asylum anywhere in Europe. And of course, Greece on its own cannot be hosting all these people. Neither can Italy. It needs to be redistributed. These people need to be redistributed and given a fair chance at having a peaceful and prosperous life. An issue that we'll certainly be revisiting, I imagine, in later shows as well. I'll leave it there for now, though. I'll be back, though, with my last segment after this break. Thanks for staying with us here in Scope, viewers. In this segment, the final segment of today's show, we're going to discuss Islamophobia in the United Kingdom, more specifically about Islamophobia within the Conservative Party, the ruling party of the UK at this moment. Zamzam Ibrahim, who is the president of the National Union of Students, she pulled out of her engagement at the Conservative Party conference due to an event that was called the Challenging Islamophobia event, which was hosted by the Policy Exchange think tank and was chaired by broadcaster Trevor Phillips. And this was meant to be a challenge to Islamophobia, but it ended up not really being about that. It ended up being a lot about people expressing concern that Islamophobia is just overstated and that its mission or goal is to in some way hurt free speech, and that it's just something that is exaggerated beyond means, and that it stops legitimate arguments or debate about Islamic values, etc. And that's why Zamzam then made the decision to not be part of that. And even Sayyid Awarsi, who used to be a Conservative member, as you well know, also has expressed dissatisfaction and disappointment at how the Conservative Party is handling Islamophobia within its ranks. Let's discuss that a bit further. We're joined now by Binna, who is an author who specializes in diversity and the ways in which biases and conscious and unconscious affect decision-making and behavior in organizations. His recent book is called Racism at Work, The Danger of Indifference. He's joining us now via Skype from Oxford in the UK. Binna, as always, thanks for your time. What do you make of the issue of Islamophobia within political parties, and especially, of course, I'm talking about the Conservative Party, and how it seems to be going almost not ignored, I would say, but just seems to be looked over?
Yeah. Actually, if you don't mind, I'll just start with the subtitle of my book, The Danger of Indifference. And I think what you have here in this particular incident is a classic example of people wanting to talk about a form of prejudice and without realizing it, minimizing it, and remaining indifferent to it.
And then why is that dangerous, or how is that dangerous? Let me put it that way. Because at a time where the country is going through, as you well know, Binna, what is seeming to be a very painful process of leaving the EU. And, we can talk about the many reasons for why the Brexit vote went the way it did. And many people would say Islamophobia/racism and anti-migrant feelings played into that vote. At this time where you're going through this extremely painful process anyways, then you seem to be having this ruling party, which is like, it's fine almost with Islamophobia.
It's there is an indifference to it. I think there are, at times of crisis like this, you also find, and the nature of the debate actually for Brexit did highlight the issue about people who are not seen to be British in some way, and very the arguments that were being put forward, they're taking our jobs, they're different to us, they have different values, were all part of that decision making, which led to the referendum, and that feeds into this. That these people are different, and of course, the Islamophobia may not have had this name long ago, but this kind of conflict, this perceived conflict with Islam, has actually gone on for centuries, and so this is just this indifference to it is actually something. It's the modern manifestation of the more explicit prejudices that we've seen in the past.
And so what does this mean then for society as in general? Because I imagine a lot of people, just lay people, would look towards their political leaders, wouldn't they, to almost be the thermometer or the gauge for how then to react to any incidents that they may see around them.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know from the research, and we know actually, you don't have to be a psychologist to tell you this, actually the leaders set the example and people follow that. I think what's most concerning about this particular incident is that it took place in a meeting that was designed to discuss Islamophobia. And then the people who were discussing it, who presumably were there to challenge it in some way or to educate people, actually demonstrated it themselves. I mean, it just shows you how ingrained this can be. And I think the other part of it is that people thought, because there were other things that happened during the course of that discussion where the very notion of Islamophobia was actually diminished itself. That people being described as having prejudices against Muslims actually kind of seem to embrace it and find humour in it. And it's that lack of reflection, which is in itself is more worrying, because actually people won't think, therefore, that being accused of being prejudiced against Muslims is unacceptable.
Binna, the argument made often when it comes to Islam, even other forms of just racism and hatred, that they essentially, when you put that label on, then you're stopping any free speech debate on any respective topic, be it Islam, be it Muslims, or anybody else, people of color, et cetera, et cetera. Is that a fair, defense of people being allowed to essentially say as they please?
You have to be able to have a debate. And if somebody feels that way, but there are ways of kind of having a discussion like this, and there are ways of expressing how you are made to feel. But irrespective of that, what you have here is it's a very clever and it's a very quick inversion. So let's say you were to accuse me of being Islamophobic, right? And I say, well, actually, what you're trying to do is shut me down and stop me from engaging, for me being able to express my views. And what then happens is that I, the perpetrator, have then become the victim. And you, the victim, have then become the perpetrator. And it's really quick. It's really clever. And without realizing it, we've swapped roles. So I can present myself now as the person who is being discriminated against, and you are the person who's doing the discrimination. It's pernicious.
And then I imagine this leads to almost like a ghettoization of people's minds, doesn't it, Binna, in some way, where a lot of then, I imagine, and of course you can correct me if I'm wrong, but minorities, be they Muslims or others, in places like the UK or other places in Europe or other places in the world, I should even say, then sort of just become bubbles on their own because they need to be protecting themselves. And then again, the rest of society is sort of a bubble as well, and they're all just sort of disconnected from each other. That's not a good thing, certainly.
No, it's not a good thing. And what you have to understand about the bubbles, mind you, is that if I am being discriminated against, and my perception is, and the perception in this case will be my reality, if I am being discriminated against and I have no way of expressing myself, because every time I bring it up, I'm accused of playing the Muslim card or something like that. That debate is shut down. Actually, this notion of a bubble, of me going into a group of people where we all are like-minded, that's actually very important for my psychological well-being. And in many respects, I've been driven into that situation because of the reactions that people have toward me. And So we need to understand that it is important for people to find somewhere safe where they can express themselves. Otherwise, it can have an even worse impact on people's well-being. So in a way, I kind of find that's going to happen.
All right, Binna, we'll leave there as a final thought, but of course, we appreciate, of course, you taking your time out this morning to speak to us there from Oxford. That was Binna Kandola, author, who is speaking to us. And of course, putting into context this very important issue of Islamophobia within the UK. Of course, we were talking about that Conservative Party conference and the event that took place by Conservative Party members, seemingly called Challenging Islamophobia, but it was anything but really challenging Islamophobia. It was almost, as Binna said, making fun of Islamophobia, making light of it, and in some regards just saying that Islamophobia is an overstated reality, which of course many Muslims, especially Muslim women, I would argue, in places like the UK would certainly take issue with, considering the Islamophobia that they are subject to on a regular basis and in increasingly alarming numbers. We'll keep a very close eye, of course, on this issue of Islamophobia in later shows here in Scope. I'll leave it there for now, though. I've been Waqar Rizvi. Thanks for watching.